Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
I'm your night bird of the airwaves here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Proud to be here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. We welcome your phone calls all throughout our 2-hour journey as we continue to move through time and space. If you'd like to get in early, we appreciate that. Questions and comments are available to you. Your turn to be heard here on Talk Radio 77 WABC at 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. And I want to thank our producer, Bill, taking and being the helmsman. He's in the helmsman seat on our powerful starship, as we like to call it, navigating the amazing signal of 77 WABC. I'm quite confident all the way out to the cosmos. Learn much more by visiting us at WABCRadio.com for repeat information and shows and special editions on the Dr. Sky Experience podcast, also available on RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. Have questions or comments? Love emails. Dr. Sky, DRSKY at WABCRadio.com. And ladies and gentlemen, a very special 2-hour program this morning, no matter where you're listening to us, around the nation or around the world. Let's remember here in the United States, Armed Forces Day, May the 17th, established back in 1949. It's the third Saturday of May, did you know that? Honoring both men and women who are currently serving in our armed forces. And of course, Veterans Day honors all veterans who had served this great nation. And Memorial Day, celebrating and honoring, I should say better, those that passed in the great service to the greatest nation on the earth. We continue, ladies and gentlemen, to remind everybody out there that not only the men who served, but also the spouses of those who endure the time of loneliness when those who are there are serving. I'm your night bird of the airwaves with special edition this morning of a very interesting show. Normally we talk on this radio program about outer space and other things, but what about inner space? In just a few moments, we will be talking with a gentleman who knows so much about the United States Navy submarine service. He participated in it, and he's the executive director of something called ColdWarBoats.org. But let's go back in our time tunnel, and let's remember, of course, the particular radio show and television series, more precisely, the Great Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea television series, also heard by some people on radio. It showed us a futuristic world of submarines, and its introduction sounded something like this.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, starring Richard Basehart, David Hedison, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
What an amazing television series. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure it's available on YouTube or wherever you can get good DVDs. But equally important, and maybe more important, is our very special guest. His name is Brad Williamson. As I mentioned before, the executive director of ColdWarBoats.org. That association, let me talk a little bit about it in our introduction. The Cold War Boats Association exists in service to the men who served on the submarines of the United States Navy's submarine service between the end of World War II and the demise of the Soviet Union in December 1992. Those sailors that supported them, their families, friends, and associates. Their mission, assisting shipmates from years ago in reconnecting, simply, easily, and without compromising their privacy. Preserving the unclassified history of Cold War submarine crews and their boats in the form of photographs, stories, artifacts, audio and video recordings, and equally important, if not most, honoring the sailors and families who sacrificed so much to help bring an end to the Cold War. Cold War Boats, it's about honor, preserving this history, and connecting with other U.S. members of this particular service. And with that, we welcome, good morning, to Brad Williamson. How are you, sir? Thanks for joining us.
Doing well, Dr. Sky. Thanks for the invitation to be here on 77 Talk Radio WABC, and the Dr. Sky Experience. I am
thank you.
Thankful.
Well, my pleasure, my friend, and I hope in this 2 hours that lots of people, and I want to throw out this kind of a welcome and an encouraging maybe phone call from people out there, any retired U.S. Navy members of the U.S. Submarine Service who might want to share some of their experiences. But this is interesting, Brad, to me. We talk always about space and all the interviews we primarily do. Next week, we're looking to have a great astronaut, a good friend of mine, a gentleman named Story Musgrave, probably the smartest man I ever met and probably one of the most incredible astronauts. I think he has like 4 master's degrees and 2 PhDs, and he was the one who fixed the Hubble Space Telescope, and he's very humble. But we mostly talk about what goes on in outer space, but the story of inner space is so fascinating. Talk about your background and what compelled you to join the United States Navy in the evolution of your career in the submarine service.
Well, that's a complex question, Dr. Sky. The short version of it would be that I was studying geophysics in college, ended up in the Navy through a series of interesting circumstances that we won't go into tonight. And
okay. Some secrets out there, I guess.
Service,
absolutely.
which was, the submarine service was a strange place to end up for somebody who grew up in West Texas. But my calling there was to be the best of the best of the best. And that's where we would find the most challenges intellectually and physically, was to push the boundaries in the deepest parts of the ocean that we could reach at that time. So my career in the Navy lasted 8 years long. I studied nuclear power in the submarine community. I was an engineer. My background was an electronics technician. That was my rating. And we studied nuclear power, nuclear propulsion, and went through a rigorous training program before we ever even got to the submarine. Spent about 2 years in school, and then another year and a half qualifying to operate the submarines. And then I had about 4 years of operational experience before I decided to move on from the Navy to new and different challenges.
Amazing. You know, your story is incredible, and I meet many people, as we all talk about people, and we say thank you for your service. I'm saying that to you and every member of the United States military, and those that, of course, passed on to the infinite, to the greatest country. I don't have to, of course, apologize for anything. Obviously, the greatest country in the world, and we support all of our military members. But in this particular case, you're doing something unusual here. You're lighting up the phone lines before we even get a chance to get into the details here. So hopefully this will be a home run for everybody out there. We will get to your calls. But Brad, just talk about this. It's very unusual for me because I suffer from claustrophobia. Sorry, folks, I'm always honest. But when you're down into the ocean, tell us the longest time you were deployed under the ocean, and I find this fascinating to hear.
Well, typically the average submariner spends somewhere between 60 and 90 days submerged at a time before pulling back into a port, or at least a foreign port. The longest time I was ever down myself was 72 days from sunrise to sunrise, as we say.
That's incredible. I mean, how does that maintain itself? I mean, everybody on there, it's you're in tight quarters. I mean, you all have to get along. And I imagine the food, according to many that I've talked to, and we're talking with you, is the best in the service. Is that correct?
Well, there's some truth to that. Certainly the submarine community, especially regarding the Cold War, existed from post-World War II, where submarines were simply submersible surface boats. They were diesel powered and had to use air to drive their diesels, to charge their batteries, to be submerged even for a short term. They weren't truly submersibles in the sense that the nuclear submarines were, and that could stay down for long periods of time. So by the time I got involved, everything was pretty much nuclear powered, and being submerged was it was part of the status quo, I suppose you could call it at that point.
Okay.
The systems that supported us were technologically advanced. We made our own air. We made our own water. We had essentially unlimited propulsion. We did refueling every 15 years. We could do quite a bit while we were submerged, which made the submarine a true military platform for both stealth and intelligence gathering and being where we needed to be when we needed to be without compromising security. So
Yes.
in order to do that, of course, you've got to have people to operate the equipment, and the entire crew of the submarine, which might have been maybe 100, 120 personnel at any one time, roughly 20 officers and 80 to 90 enlisted men, all trained in specific aspects of the technologies on the submarine. We had specialists obviously to operate the nuclear reactor, but there's specialists for maintaining and operating the torpedoes and the weapons systems that support them. And so everybody had specialties. And of course, probably one of the most important specialties on a submarine is fell in a category back then. It was referred to as mess management, which meant the cooks.
Yeah, and, absolutely. You're hungry and you want to get good food because it demoralizes people, I imagine, if you serve them, a sloppy meal. So there is truth to that the submariners usually get better than average, at least in modern times, actually, food?
Certainly within constraints. You kind of have to qualify that a little bit and say, yes, we had the best food in the fleet, but the reality was it's a submarine and we're going to be gone for a while. And so when you leave, you got to carry a lot of food, obviously, to feed 120 people for 60 to 90 days. Well, that's a lot of food. And in fact, there's so much food that there's not enough place on a submarine to store it all. So for the first few weeks after leaving port, the decks would be covered with boxes of cans of food that we walked on because there wasn't any other place to put it.
Incredible. So there's no space, obviously. I mean, you're in tight quarters. But quickly, Brad, what's a duty shift on a submarine like yours? I mean, what are they, 8 hours, as long as you need to work and then rest? Tell us.
Well, so I can only speak to what I knew back then. I know it's changed since I was in the service. Back in the day, we worked, we had a 6-hour shift rotation. So my typical day was 18 hours long. I would be 6 hours on shift and standing watch in my particular duty stations. I was a reactor operator. As I progressed, I became a supervisor for the engine room, an engineering watch supervisor. And my watch standing occupied 6 hours of my day. After I was off watch, I had 6 hours, which was my off-going watch period. And during that time, I had to do essentially everything that I couldn't do on watch, which would be maintenance items, administrative work. I was a supervisor, so I was responsible for the reactor controls division, which has...
It's a lot of responsibility. Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility.
For a 22-year-old guy, it was an enormous responsibility.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, Brad Williamson, Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. We're going to be spending the entire 2 hours of our radio show, The Dr. Sky Experience, because many of you out there have expressed through emails that we never can get through, meaning the callers, because there's so many wonderful guests, as you folks tell us. So let's begin. Here we go, Brad. You're lighting this up big time here. Let's say good morning to David from Staten Island, if you're with us. Good morning to you. You're on with...
Dr. Sky and Company. In 1844, the first real submarine called the Alligator was designed by my fifth great-grandfather, Ben Franklin Costin. He did not build his submarine, it had oars on it. Brutus D. Valeroy, 17 years after Ben Franklin Costin died, was the outbreak of the American Civil War. And Brutus D. Valeroy was hired by the Navy to build it. He built the original, and he built a second one without oars, I put a propeller on it, which made it the first real submarine. I'd like to add one other thing. I just found out recently when Brutus D. Valeroy tried to steal it from the United States to Napoleon Bonaparte. That would have changed history between England and France dramatically. I am the fifth great-grandson.
That's amazing. Wow. See the kind of callers we
Incredible.
get, Brad? I mean, David's got some interesting info. Please respond. I think this is exciting.
Well, I know the Alligator. It's not a Cold War boat, but we do actually reference it on our website. And I find it incredible that I'm actually able to talk to somebody who is related to the man who designed and built that.
That's amazing.
Because I know from the other end of the spectrum how much technology has changed from the days of oars and the first submarine, the Alligator, to today's technology. It is truly incredible to see how much we have advanced in that regard.
David, that's a beautiful story. Do you have a further comment here before we move on? That's an amazing historical record there.
Yes, a lot of the flags he used on the Navy ships on the 4th of July, he designed. The British copied the idea and made their own. The very pistol used to be called excuse me a second there. The Berry pistol. Lieutenant Edmund Berry was given a pistol from my 5th grade grandmother to try to raise money. She lost her husband and one child in the same year, and she did not want welfare. Lieutenant Edmund Berry was court-martialed possibly for stealing from the United States Navy, and other things came out as the flags according to the Monitor and the Merrimack. A flare that they used there was a stick with a strike at the tip. Had trouble with the rain and the weather. Somebody went down to the coal for the engines that John Erickson designed and the whole boat, and it managed to call signal for help. And a Lyle cannon originally is also my family.
That's incredible, that story. You know, I think, Brad, both of you guys should get in touch with each other after this radio show. And, Brad, how do they reach you if he wants to send you an email or something, or just to get in touch?
The fastest way to do it is to contact me through the coldwarboats.org website. That's 3 words all together, no spaces, coldwarboats.org. There's a link on the very first page of that that has my photograph and name under it. You click on that link, and you can send an email directly to me.
David, thank you for your time, and God bless. That's
Thank you very much. It's more, but I have to have help.
Maybe you guys will get in touch with each other. I think there's definitely an unfinished story going on here. We appreciate you.
Send me
Let's
an
say good
email,
morning.
David. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Let's say good morning to Detective Nolan. Good morning, Detective. How are you doing?
Good morning, sir. Thank you for taking my call. I would like to pay tribute to my uncle, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Nolan, who served on 3 boats, 3 submarines. First, the Robert E. Lee, then the USS Flying Fish, and then the USS Dace. Wow. And I can tell you from conversations with him, which were minimal, we didn't know what he was doing till years after he retired. And one of the assignments that he had during the Cold War, he was one of the boats, he was second in command executive officer on one of the boats, probably the Flying Fish or the Dace. They would go to the Mediterranean and swap out the recording cables, the recording boxes that were placed on Russian communication cables underneath the water. I wonder if our guest knows about that.
Brad, Detective, seems to have a lot of good questions and a lot of energy. What say you, Brad?
So they do. First thing I was doing was racing through our roster on the website to see if we referenced Thomas Nolan yet, which we do not. We're still in the young stages of the association. We've added about 6,000 names so far out of the estimated 500,000 sailors that served on submarines between 1946 and 1991. And ultimately, Thomas Nolan will be one of those because that's one of the ways we honor those sailors. And so the issues in question, changing out recording devices, that was a Cold War ongoing project in both the Pacific and the Atlantic that we had submarines designated to do that routine to change those out. So I have heard of those. I hadn't heard of the Mediterranean or the Dace and the Flying Fish specifically. But if you want to learn more about that, there was a very good book written back in the early 90s called Blind Man's Bluff by Sherry Sontag, and I think it's Chris and Annette Drew. Blind Man's Bluff, which talks about Cold War intelligence gathering in both the Atlantic and Pacific up through that time period, up through the late 70s, early 80s, which is remarkably insightful into the things that we did. Obviously, the security restrictions that your father had in place, I am still subject to myself. So I can't talk in specific about our missions. But if you read Blind Man's Bluff, you read a lot about the kind of things we do. And the submarine I served on, which was the USS William H. Bates, SSN 680, is mentioned by name in there as one of the 5 special projects boats that were involved in a lot of that intelligence work in the 70s and 80s on. The Ivy Bells project and which was the Halibut was one of the submarines involved there, all very similar. So we did a lot of that kind of thing because the role of submarines in the Cold War changed from being offensive weapons at the end of World War II, changed a lot more into intelligence gathering by the end of the 70s and 80s, because that was something we were very good at. We could be in places where people wouldn't expect us, and we could gather electronic information like from radio and telephone, things like that. And that's been a big part of the Cold War history of American submarines.
No, that's amazing. I mean, both of you together, just like we had our previous caller. And Detective Nolan, it's coldwarboats.org if you'd like to get in touch with Brad in a deeper way. And again, God bless your dad and all the other people that served on these particular submarines.
It wasn't my dad. It was my uncle. It was his
your
brother,
uncle. Excuse me.
My godfather. And yes. The book Blind Man's Bluff, I'm very familiar with it. My uncle told me about it. And it was when that book came out, we then found out what he was doing overseas.
Detective, thank you for your call, and I still owe you an answer. We're still searching our database for a great guest in the area of space medicine, so we haven't given up, nor have I forgotten you, and I appreciate your contributions to the Dr. Sky experience. Thank you, Detective. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, Brad, this is amazing. As early as we started, the phone lines just keep rocking here, but I just want to, just before we go to the break in a couple of minutes, the hard break, just want to talk with you about the particular submarine that you were involved with, the USS William H. Bates, listed here in the registry as SSN 680. You know it so well. But the funny story that I'm reading about this, and I wanted you to comment on this, is that submarines were in the previous days named for fish, obviously. But along comes this particular sad incident when the namesake, William H. Bates, he dies, of cancer, and the Navy decides to make a change here. And that change comes to name this particular submarine in honor of William H. Bates, a congressional member. And then, of course, what's going on with Admiral Hyman Rickover. Wow, we're going to talk about him after the break, too. But then the director, as you know, of the Navy's nuclear reactor program, when he was talking about the big change from fish to names, what did he say? Fish don't vote. I thought that was an apropos kind of a description. What say you? Isn't that amazing how they changed everything then?
Well, so the first, in fact, the William H. Bates was the first fast attack submarine that was named after a person rather than a fish or a sea creature. We had all kinds of what we thought were fascinating names of submarines before then, but when that tradition changed, most of us in the service were disappointed that it changed to honoring individuals as opposed to being the denizens of the deep. But our ship, the Bates, the interesting thing about the Bates is it was actually named the Redfish. We were named the Redfish after a World War II submarine that was very successful. And one of the ways we honored our prior submarines and their crews was to name newer ships after them. And there's many examples of that on the Cold War Boats website. But William H. Bates was going to be the Redfish. And after the keel was laid, then the name was changed to honor William H. Bates. And when I served on her in the 80s, we routinely found references to the Redfish. There were the drawings and documents. Many of them had never been changed over.
Yes, sir.
Still referred to the Redfish. So we called ourselves the Redfish sometimes just to confuse people. But William H. Bates was our patronym, I guess you would call it. And then in fact, I've met family friends of William H. Bates, and one of his descendants is an active member on our website. So I would extend that invitation to everybody listening out there. The site is for people that served, for the people that supported the people that served, people who are interested in submarines of the Cold War. You can go there. You can register quickly and easily. It doesn't cost anything. And especially if you have interest in your relatives, who might have served. This is a place where ultimately you will find information about them.
So well done. And you're doing this obviously not for profit. I mean, that's the part that excites me the most. It's a dedication to those that served, like yourself, and others to what? Have a meeting place to share stories, memories with the entire families, of course, that served in the United States Submarine Service. You know, I played, as people heard before, the opening portion of the television show, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And over the years, I had a friendly relationship with David Hedison, who played the part of Captain Lee Crane on that particular television series. I was so enthralled with that, as many people were. So throughout this 2-hour program, you may be hearing the voice of actor David Hedison. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you knew this, Brad, he was also the person who played in the original sci-fi movie The Fly. But how would you know it was him, obviously, when that horrific fly head he wore? But the point I'm trying to make here, to make everybody at least understand, that what we're doing right now is a dedication for all those that served our military, but in special focus. The Armed Forces Day that we're talking about here, established in 1949, we're bringing you on board and proud to call you a brother here. Brad Williamson, Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. Folks, there's plenty of time to get in with your questions and comments, and don't think any of them are foolish. You may not understand how submarines work. You may not understand what makes them rise or go down into the deep depths. We have so many answers and so many questions. That to get answered, 1-800-848-9222. We'll be right back with more with Brad Williamson and talking about Cold War boats.
You're listening to one of the most iconic stations in the nation, an American original. Talk Radio 77 WABC and WABCRadio.com.
31 minutes after the hour, we're privileged and honored to have as our special guest for the entirety of this show. That is 2 hours with the Dr. Sky Experience. Brad Williamson, the Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. And I got to ask you, Brad, going back, your opinions, which is much more important than mine, on that whole television series, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Was it really too campy for somebody who knows submarines, or was it kind of a benchmark for what might come in the future? I'd like to hear your response to that.
Well, I think that's a trick question in some ways, but
Okay.
Because the last time I saw Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, I was about knee-high to a grasshopper. So
Okay.
I think that in one way, one answer to that question is all submarine movies are too campy for those who are served in submarines.
That's what I wanted to hear. Truth. There you go.
And we say that because first of all, in submarines, for all the movies want to make it out to be, it's what we would describe as being long periods of interminable boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And that in itself does not make a good movie. You need a lot more moments of terror if you're going to keep an audience.
Yes.
So submarine life is somewhat like flying a spy plane like the SR-71. You don't have jet jockeys in those seats. You have very disciplined, controlled, unemotional, qualified professionals that fly those. And submarines are very much the same. We have an incredible amount of discipline built into us because the sea is an absolutely unforgiving mistress, and will kill you the moment you turn your back.
And speaking of which, you mentioned to me something, Brad, when we were sitting and chatting. You mentioned that in analysis that we're making a comparison. We're always talking space, of course, here. There's many people understand who've listened. But give us the comparison. You had mentioned about people and astronauts don't have to worry about this, whereas you in the submariner world describe that.
Right. There's a very significant parallel, I think, between astronauts or people who are living in space continuously and the submarine community, because we both have an absolutely unforgiving environment outside our pressure boundary. Now, in space, your pressure boundary can be a 1/16 of an inch thick and be perfectly fine because your pressure differential is not very high. In submarine world, of course, pressures are enormously high. We might even say astronomically high.
Agreed.
And you have to have very robust boundaries in order to keep the water out of the people tank. And that we have in common, and I think that is creates a bond between submariners and astronauts that is probably unique, in that we are both continually aware of the environment around us, and you can't ignore it for a minute. The big difference is, of course, in space, you don't have an enemy that's trying to kill you.
Yes.
Yeah, at least yet. So.
Well said, Brad, and we hope that astronauts are safe and all of our submariners are living a life that they're safe from harm, but we'll get into the conversation as we move forward. But I got to say this, Brad, you're really rocking here. You were like lighting these lines up, and that's why, obviously, we're trying to give these, our audience, which we love, the opportunity to get in with questions and comments and expand this, in many cases, to 2 hours. Let's say good morning to Pamela in New Jersey. You're on with Brad Williamson. How are you this morning?
Hi, Pamela.
Good morning. Hi. My dad, during World War II, my dad was a mechanic, very, very bright. In fact, the Navy wanted to send him to engineering school. He ended up on a above the water, but he did volunteer for submarine duty, and they said they couldn't take him at the time because he needed too much dental work. During the Depression, people couldn't afford dentistry. And they worked on his teeth. They did a really good job. They did a full bridge, and it was really excellent work, whoever the dentist was. And but by then, I guess they needed him on a ship. But I was always in awe of my dad. Period. My dad was really something else.
Sure.
But to volunteer to be in a submarine, like you said, that's a good relationship. It's like being an astronaut. And then you talked about the pressure differential. They don't want anybody down there with a toothache.
Yeah, sure. This is amazing, Brad. Please continue. I mean, Pamela, you're lighting it up here because this is all these stories are so important. Go ahead, Brad.
I can speak to the dental aspect of it because after I volunteered for submarines, the first thing they did was strap me to a dentist chair and remove 4 of my wisdom teeth, all in the same visit with, from my perspective, substantially less anesthesia than was needed.
Oh, wow.
Ouch.
They weren't going to let me go to sea either, and that was true about many of the sailors. We had limited ability to perform medical support when you're forward deployed. But speaking to that, the submarine wardroom, which is where the officers meet and work and eat, that table was actually designed to be turned into a surgical table. There were lights in the overhead that could be turned on to provide operating lights. And the corpsman, if you were on a ballistic missile submarine, they actually had a medical doctor on board, but a smaller fast attack submarines typically had a Navy corpsman who had special submarine training. On my submarine, I was the backup corpsman. I assisted the corpsman in his responsibilities as one of my 6 or 8 collateral duties. And we had the capability for doing minor surgeries on board, but the degree of confidence in our abilities would be somewhat tempered by the fact that we would have to use reference books during the surgery. So your dad was miraculously spared by having to wait.
How about that, Pamela?
First.
That's pretty good.
Well, his ship, he worked below on the engine room, and his ship was kamikaze, but they survived.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Goodness.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's even more of
Well, Pamela, this is
providential
fascinating.
answer.
And if I was on board, I don't know if Brad would agree, the 2 best friends that I would try to make is the chef and the doctor on any of those long excursions, because that would hopefully
That's pretty true.
Well,
calm me
speaking
down.
of that, my dad always talked about when they would go into port, they always knew the English ships because they would stink. Their food was horrible.
Wow. Pamela, thank you so much. Hope you'll continue to join us in future editions of the Dr. Sky Experience. Let's say good morning to Joe, I believe is it New Jersey? Yes, I think so. Good morning, Joe. You're on with Brad Williamson. How are you?
Hi, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a great show, by the way.
Thank you, sir.
I have a few questions for Brad. First of all, the history of the torpedoes, which I know many years ago, one of the submarines was sunk by its own torpedo. So I'd like to know how far they have advanced in that area. Also, I would like to know details of any submarines that are doing research on the bottom of the sea. and what kind of repercussions a sailor has when they come up after 30, 60 days, and is there any lasting disabilities for them?
Joe, great questions.
Okay.
Brad, this is a lot to take on, but hey, you're the expert.
Yep. All right. So the first question was torpedoes and their development. And obviously, state of torpedoes today is classified, but torpedoes have come a long ways. Of course, in the Civil War, torpedoes were first used, and they were technically not self-propelled torpedoes. They were mines that could be attached to the side of a ship, but were called torpedoes. And by the First World War, torpedoes had evolved to being steam-powered, self-propelled devices that were not intelligent. You had to point them at something and hope you hit it. And that hadn't changed much by World War II. So there were still steam-powered torpedoes. There were compressed air-powered torpedoes. The guidance systems and the detonation systems were extraordinarily primitive by today's standards, and there's many stories in World War II of submarines hitting a target and not exploding, or submarines that would circle back around and put the launching ship at risk, that sort of thing. But by the 80s, torpedoes had advanced to the point where they had engines that actually burned fuel that did not require external oxygen sources, and they were developed. They had their own sonar listening systems and the ability to be self-guided, that they could be designated to a target and then launched, and they would proceed to track that target unassisted until they could would detonate or run out of fuel. So they've gotten very sophisticated, and you can bet, and that was 1980 was 45 years ago, so you can bet that the technology today is substantially transcended what existed at the time. But in the end, the torpedo is essentially a self-guided drone that you set loose to destroy a target, and that's one of the most valuable weapons that submarines have. Although, of course, our ability to strike targets in the air and to launch cruise missiles and things like that has also become a part of the weapons repertoire of a submarine today. And you see that a lot on the news. Submarines are routinely on the front lines, even recently launching cruise missiles at targets in, I think
we've seen that. We've seen a lot of that where it's just not torpedoes. Right. It's actually, you see off the coast, I know during the Iraq War, you'd see the submarine. They didn't show you everything, but you see this light show coming out of the base of the submarine. That's incredible. Two are you still with us, or I know you had some other questions?
I'm listening.
Okay. Thank you.
So two more.
I have two nephews in the submarine. They don't tell me what they do or where they go, of course.
Right.
They're classified.
And neither do I. I can't tell you that either. But
I understand that.
The research submarines you mentioned. So first of all, there's very few submarines that can actually go to the bottom of the ocean and do any research. The Navy has a deep submergence group, which consists of deep diving research submarines that are not weaponized. They're strictly for research and development and exploration of deep. And of course, you're probably familiar with the Trieste, which was one of the deepest diving submarines, which went to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And there's a handful of others that they use for ocean bottom research. But do
they have sailors on them?
Say again?
Well, gentlemen, excuse me for interrupting, but let's hold Joe over because I want, of course, Brad to get us, complete answers that Joe's asking questions. So, Joe, if you don't mind, stand by as we go to the break here in just a moment, and Brad will continue with you because it's only fair to, we can't have 18,000 questions, but yours are valid and you deserve an answer. And we'll be right back here on the Dr. Sky Experience, where on Talk Radio 77 WABC, and we're going to move into hour number 2 with the same special guest here so we can get more questions and more obvious information about the submarine service. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, Here's Dr. Sky.
Hello, my name is Don Walsh. I'm a retired U.S. Navy captain and an oceanographer and, I guess, an explorer. Some 51 years ago, my partner Jacques Picard and I dove the U.S. Navy's Bathyscaphe Trieste, a small manned submersible, to the deepest place in the world ocean. That was in the Challenger Deep in the Marianas Trench in the far western Pacific, and the water depth there was nearly 7 miles.
46 minutes after the hour, we continue our conversation with our special guest, Brad Williamson, Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org, and continuing with answers and questions. We want to continue to have Joe's questions in New Jersey. Joe, continue on, please. We didn't want to cut you short, so go right ahead if you needed to repeat your questions that Brad wanted.
Oh, well, he answered the torpedo question. I'm looking forward to the research he told us. Are there drones that do the research also, and also any disability effects that the sailors have when they are submerged for a long time and then come up?
Right. So I'm not as familiar with the current technology in terms of research and exploration, but I suspect that we do a lot using remotely operated vehicles or submersible drones that can do that kind of thing, just because it takes a great deal of technology and expense to put a man on the bottom of the ocean, just like it does to put a man in space. And if you can leave the man out of the equation, you can go a lot deeper, a lot further, a lot faster, and a lot cheaper without the human being involved. And we have the technology to do that. So I suspect you'll find that there are drones doing research.
Yeah.
Joe?
Are there any books relating to what they have found at the bottom of the ocean?
Oh, certainly. I'm sure there are. I can't name any off the top of my head, but a quick internet search would reveal tons. There's all kinds of exciting stuff. In fact, one of my favorites would be involved with, it's called Project Azorian, which is a discussion of the CIA's project to raise a Russian submarine off the bottom of the Pacific using a ship they built specifically with Howard Hughes, the Glomar Challenger, and which the cover story was it would be used for research to mine manganese nodules off the bottom of the ocean. And that book, while it talks about the spy/intelligence capabilities of what was going on, continuously refers to the cover story of the manganese nodules, which is a research issue that they had been recently discovered in the late 60s, early 70s, and became the cover story for Project Azorian.
Very interesting. Ted, thank you so much for calling. We have a boatload, no pun intended, of callers that want to get in. But Joe, thank you. I appreciate you, and I hope you'll continue to join us as we expand the Dr. Sky experience. You have a good morning, sir. Thank you so much. Brad, what I wanted to talk about when they heard that little introduction before, I had the honor and many honors to speak with Captain Walsh, who, as you know better,
yes,
went down with the Picard, the gentleman who was a balloonist, and also that whole family is so famous. But that story to me, I have it somewhere. It's a whole hour interview. We'd have to pull it up. But I love live radio better. But this is so amazing. What he told me is that they went down, and it took them a long time. They just didn't drop down into 35,000 feet. But he said to me, and this is why it's important in one of your comments, even down there were sea creatures that were crawling around, even at that crush depth or that whatever that pressure. What kind of pressure you think is down there? That's amazing.
Well, it's easy enough to calculate, but I can't do it in my head. It's a lot.
Okay.
I can tell you that. I do know that my experience with Marianas Trench is we had to dispose of a compressed gas bottle on our submarine that was leaking, and the gas was complicating our atmospheric control on the submarine, and we had to get rid of it before it really fouled things up. And so we ended up dropping it out of our trash disposal unit, and it was a small compressed gas bottle. Now, think about this for a second. It's, what a compressed gas bottle looks like and weighs.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, they're massive because they have to hold 4,000 pounds of pressure inside the bottle. And we dropped that out the bottom of the ship and listened to it as it fell literally into the Marianas Trench. We just happened to be passing over at the time. And until finally the bottle imploded. Now, think about that. It's a steel bottle, with walls 3/8 of an inch thick, designed to hold 4,000 pounds of pressure, and there was 4,000 pounds of pressure in it when it was crushed flat by the pressure in the Marianas Trench,
Amazing.
And it was nowhere near the bottom.
Oh my God! Yeah, I can't imagine. As the Captain Walsh's interview with me, he described that if they didn't have lights, obviously there's nothing down there. Obviously, that's common sense. But he told me that there's an array of fish down there, and this is not a fish specialty. Ichthyology would have to get somebody on that. But they had these fish with these amazingly looking, well, who are we to say ugly? These very luminescent heads with strange looking, they look like monsters to what we would consider, but maybe we look like monsters to them, so who knows. But there was something down there.
Yes, and they're very hard to study because you can't bring them up, because when they depressurize, they literally come apart. They're designed to live under pressure, deep submergence pressure, and you can't bring them to the surface to study them without pressurizing them in a case or something. And
I enjoyed the movie The Abyss. That was interesting. If people
me too.
haven't seen it, that was kind of a cool movie, and we won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it. But let's see before we go to the top of the hour, let's see if John's been holding on in New Jersey. If you're with us, John, good morning. You're on with Brad Williamson. How are you this morning?
Morning, John.
Hello?
Oh, go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
Yes.
We're getting the wrong information here, but go ahead.
You ever serve on a yellow submarine, Brad?
Hey, now that's an amazing way to start. That's incredible. Nah, what about submarines like that? You ever see one of those, Brad?
Never served on the yellow submarine. All of the submarines I served on are black on top and primer red on the bottom. And with one exception, I didn't serve on this one, but in one exception, in World War II, one of the submarines we had was in the process of being painted, had to get to sea very quickly, and they couldn't finish the paint job, and they had to make do with what they had, and they mixed up the paint and painted it pink. So we briefly had a pink submarine in World War II, but I've never served on anything but the black kind, and it can be confusing in port because they all are painted black and they all look very much the same, even to a trained and experienced eye. And the Yellow Submarine confounds every search that I do for submarine-related materials on the internet. I have to specifically block Yellow Submarine so that I don't get all the Beatles documentation with it. So,
hey, John, if you're still there with us, you've given me some inspiration. I collect, I'm still a child. I'm 69 at heart. But I still collect the Hot Wheels, and I have somewhere in my collection one of the Hot Wheels Yellow Submarines. I'm not going to part with that one, but if you're still with us, do you have a question or comment before we go to the top of the hour? Sounds like he's gone. Anyway, Brad, this is fascinating just to talk with you, but the whole subject of submarines, when we come into the next hour, what I'd love you to do and take charge of the whole conversation is descriptions of submarines if we were looking at them. All the different names of the pieces, what they call the sail, all these different things to get people to understand, in a fun way about how these submarines actually operate, talk a little bit about how they're manufactured, the process. But in the few moments that we do have, let's start in that general conversation. You look at a submarine, the more modern ones, the Cold War boats that you're talking about, I'm so amazed at the ones before them. And I want to just jump in on these German U-boat type submarines and the Japanese and even American type submarines of those diesel boats. I can't get enough of those movies, like the particular German U-boat movies. They're quite fascinating.
Oh, I agree. One of my all-time favorite movies, and I would consider to be the best submarine movie ever made, would be Das Boot, which was a story of a World War II German submarine as it struggled to get through the Mediterranean to an Italian port where it was finally sunk, and the ordeal the crew went there to make that happen. Just a phenomenally well-made movie, and probably the most accurate representation of at least World War II submarine life that's ever happened. Other favorite movies would include Hunt for Red October, which is probably the best representation of a nuclear submarine movie, and not far off the truth in some of the preposterous things that were happening during the Cold War. So yeah, I'm a big submarine movie fan myself. But like I had said before, all the movies seem a little bit hammy for those of us that served, and we know
a little too Hollywood, right? A little too Hollywood.
What do they say about movies? It's a good movie is just about real life with all the boring bits removed. That makes a very short submarine movie.
A very short one indeed. No, you're right. No, that's amazing. And if you look at back, I mean, that must have been a hellish environment. And maybe Hollywood didn't do an over, glamorization of it. But you watch those movies like Das Boot. I mean, if you gentlemen and people on board the submarines that you served on, and anybody listening who did, even though those conditions may not be like a hotel, that must have been a hellish environment to be in. You see them sweating constantly, the horrible, fumes from diesel, everything. That must have been just a hell on earth environment.
Yeah, they were much tougher submariners than I am. Certainly, I had the luxury of air conditioning and hot and cold running fresh water. I mean, diesel boat submarines, you took saltwater showers if you got a saltwater shower. You didn't have fresh water to wash with.
Wow.
It was a very, very, very closely conserved in the diesel boats. I mean, even the modern diesel boats, that's making fresh water out of salt water is a expensive proposition in terms of energy. So you don't take it for granted. And even on our submarine, when we made gallons and gallons of fresh water. I mean, thousands of gallons of water a day, fresh water. But it all goes to the engineering plant because we use steam to drive turbines to make electricity and to turn the shaft that makes the ship go. And so water, first call of water goes to the plant if it needs it. It's only after that there's water, if there's water left over, that you're free to take showers and do things like that. But even so, the difference between a World War II submariner and a Cold War submariner, at least towards the end of the Cold War, is dramatic. We were clean and our clothes were washed. That was.
No, I don't know how you folks endure that because, I was invited, my brother and a few others in the media, to go out to a Tiger cruise or a part of one on the Carl Vinson. And that was amazing. We flew on the Cod out from San Diego and landed somewhere out in the ocean. About 2 hours of a flight. That was amazing. And did the catapult launch, which I'll never forget. I didn't ask for a little, bag to hold under my mouth there, but it was an amazing experience. But what I'm trying to say is that whole experience of being confined in a submarine, it may not, of course, be for everybody. But, folks, we appreciate the calls, and we're still going to continue here with our special guest, gladly and proudly, Brad Williamson, Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. If you're a person who's a little shy and maybe you don't want to call, we understand. You just like to listen. That's important to us, too. But you may have a service member or someone involved in the submarine service that you'd like added to the list at ColdWarBoats.org. Get in touch with Brad. We'll be right back as we move into hour number 2 of the Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
And back at it at 3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you're listening to us. Obviously, we wish you the best of your Saturday evening and into Sunday morning as we move through time and space. The Dr. Sky Experience here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. If you'd like to email me, of course, it's simply DRSKY, Dr. Sky, at WABCRadio.com. And kindly visit our podcast section. You can go to the WABCRadio.com website. Go there, of course, at your convenience to hear repeats of this particular show and other updates as we do the Sky Update twice a month to let you in on what are the beautiful things, the many beautiful things, I should say, that you can see in our wonderful nighttime skies. So instead of talking about outer space, we're talking about inner space with our special guest of Hour 2 now, Brad Williamson, Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. And the callers are just coming right through here, just like they should. And let's continue on with the callers. Let's say good morning to John in Arizona. How are you this morning? And thanks for spending time with us.
Brad, what technology did it take to destroy that Russian oil pipeline in the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, to be honest, I don't know specifically about that event. I don't know anything about that, but I do know that given the resources available to rogue states and bad actors, it could range from anything from something literally whooped up in somebody's garage and put in position manually to something much more exotic. So I'm that's kind of beyond my area of expertise.
John, are you referring to the Nord Stream? Is that what you're referring to? The pipe?
Yeah,
the pipeline?
yes. It was supplying Europe, and it ruptured.
But
go ahead.
When I would analyze that, I would look at it from a perspective of what everybody deals with when trying to do something of that nature is what's the cheapest, easiest way to do it. And in a situation like that, I think this has been borne out, at least from what I've read, is that for like the undersea cables that have been damaged and possibly the undersea pipeline, it might apply there, is simply, dragging an anchor or a hook behind a surface ship that's traveling, if the depth permits it, is sufficient to damage pipelines and cables. There's a whole lot of mariner limitations on operating in areas where there's submerged cables and pipelines that are intended to prevent that from happening. But if somebody was deliberately trying to do it, it could easily be done.
Yeah, John, I was wondering if you bring up a good point here, because imagine how many cables do lie on the bottom of the ocean, and these pipelines, I mean, this is obvious opportunity for bad actors to, maybe cut off. And I've heard, and I can't prove this, but I've read, I don't believe everything I read on the internet, that even the Chinese naval forces were actively involved. Brad, maybe you heard something about this, in tampering with some of these undersea cables. I don't know if you or John heard about that.
I haven't heard specifics. It wouldn't surprise me. They've been done some pretty desperate activities, but I can't speak to it specifically.
Understood.
I can think about an interesting story with Ivy Bells, which was the project in the Pacific to tap underwater phone cables that the Soviet Union was using to communicate with their naval base in Kamchatka, which go under the Sea of Okhotsk there, that run to the mainland, because that's the shortest distance. And back in the 60s, when we had first come up with the idea of listening to somebody's underwater cables, the question came up was, well, how do we find them? Which is a reasonable question. If you're going to go send a submarine to do something to them, you want to be able to find them. And after a great deal of discussion and deliberation, somebody suggested, well, when I'm out fishing in the lake here, I see this big sign on the shore that says, "Don't anchor here, underwater cables." And
wow.
Perhaps the Russians do something like that, and maybe all we have to do is just drive around the edge and look for signs on the shore, and sure enough, that's exactly what they found, were big signs in Russian that said, "Don't anchor here, submerged underwater communications cables." And we had everything we needed to do from there. We found where they were. So,
John, a follow-up, if you're still with us. Any other comment you want to make?
No, thank you very much for talking on the subject.
No, I appreciate your time. Hope you'll continue to join us on this particular program.
Before you ask another caller, if you will, I want to go back to a question Joe asked in the first hour.
Yes, go ahead.
I think it's an important one that people may be curious about. He asked if there were repercussions or consequences to being in a submarine for so long. And we know in space, from the astronauts and researchers that have been on the space station, when you spend a lot of time in space and you come back to Earth, there's consequences. You lose bone mass, you lose muscle mass. There's all kinds of things that affect you physically because you've been essentially in a free fall state for the duration of your orbits around the Earth. Submariners have a different set of problems, but we do experience problems coming back from being submerged for a long time. The most significant one, I think, is that if you're in a submarine, your sight distance is very limited. You can only see the distance from where you are to the next compartment, and the compartments are the watertight bulkheads that divide up the ship inside to make it less vulnerable to sinking if it were to flood. So there's these compartment walls with hatches in them, and when you're walking around, the furthest you can see is maybe sometimes 20 or 30 feet, unless you get perfectly lined up and look through a series of hatches, which nobody takes the effort to do. So when you come back to shore after being gone for, often we're deployed for 6 months at a time, you're not submerged for the whole time, but you are submerged for most of it. And when you get back to home port and you get out, one thing you find is that for the next couple of days, your eyes can't focus on distant objects.
Wow, that's a revelation, and I'm glad you're telling people this, because all we hear, about is in space, all this, the denigration of the bones in the body, radiation sickness. I never, ever would have known that, and that's amazing. So how long did it take to get readjusted?
2 or 3 days usually, and you sort of felt like you'd been to the eye doctor, and they dilate your eyes and things just don't focus well. So it's distracting. You get headaches. Most of the headaches come from the fact that you're breathing oxygen again. That's the biggest, probably the most traumatic change is when we're submerged in a submarine. We have two significant enemies. One of them is fire and one of them is flooding. And to mitigate the possibility of fires on a submarine, we reduce the oxygen concentration from the normal 21%, which is what you get in when you're out on the beach breathing fresh air. You're breathing roughly 21% oxygen. We'll reduce oxygen down to, for during normal operations, maybe 18 or 17%, which it makes combustion more difficult, and so the fires aren't as severe. And under the worst case conditions, sometimes we had to run under limited oxygen supplies. We would turn the oxygen levels down to the minimum necessary to sustain life, which is about 16%. And at that point, a cigarette won't stay lit. And we know that from experience. So there was a time, not anymore, but in my day, cigarettes were places where people smoked, and that was kind of a characteristic of being a submariner, is people smoked because there was nothing else to do besides bite your fingernails when you needed a nervous settlement.
No, it's amazing how people like space, like astronauts, of course. I'm not one, but we get many here on this show, and we'll have one hopefully next Friday to talk about long-duration space missions and things of that nature. But undersea, that's why we have you here. Let's continue on and see if we have Bill in New York City. Good morning, Bill, if you're with us. Your
Hi,
questions or comments? Go
yes,
ahead.
good morning. I had two questions for the guest, if he could comment on them. One was the disappearance of the nuclear submarine, the Thresher, on board, where was the entire crew. It was never brought up to the surface, I believe. That was sometime in the mid-'60s. And also, this is maybe apocryphal, but I believe the Kellogg's cereal company was including as a premium inside special boxes an actual replica of the nuclear submarine, the Nautilus, which prompted a congressional investigation as to how certain secrets of its design were revealed in a cereal box which people could get for free.
Oh, yeah, I remember I had one. What'd you use? You used baking soda, I guess, to make it move. Right.
Vinegar, right.
Right. Well,
yeah.
Take those questions in reverse order. I'll start with the Nautilus thing, because, of course, I played with those when I was younger. Similar items, and I don't know. I was not aware of any scandal associated with it. At the time, I know Nautilus being the first nuclear submarine that was ever built in the world. It was commissioned in 1954, a couple years before I was born, and it was the height of the Cold War. Things were very complicated. I grew up in West Texas with a bomb shelter in the driveway in my house, literally. So the Cold War was near and dear to my heart. But so I know things were very classified. We were very nervous about what the Soviets could find out, and we went to great lengths to protect that. And of course, it turns out that in some cases it wasn't necessary, because there's certain mechanical principles, the laws of physics and things, that describe how submarines could what shape they should be and how they should what they would look like, which, if you look at Russian submarines, there's not a great deal of difference between theirs and ours, simply because the best designs were always going to migrate in the same direction, at least for the exteriors of the ship. So I suspect it was quite a surprise when it showed up. But the fact is, I mean, you can bet that companies like Revell, who made plastic models of submarines,
I love them.
Would have been out there taking as many photographs as they could whenever the thing showed up in public. And once a ship's released to the public, there's no keeping the exterior view secret. And of course, that's the advantage of the submarine is that it doesn't matter what it looks like, because once we submerge, you'll never see us. You won't be able to find us. You won't know where we are. And so today, there's a lot less concern about people seeing the exterior of the submarine. And I think we should come back to that later, because Dr. Scott.
Well, we should, but I want to ask Bill something, if he's still with us. Your little description of the serial submarine, that was so cool. I think you can still find them in novelty shops. I don't know if they still work. But this is interesting, Bill. I'm going to ask Brad one day when we meet. I have a 3.5, 4 foot model of the Seaview. It cost me over $100. But
Holy
maybe
mackerel.
with his help, I might be able to get it to look right instead of, if I don't glue the thing together right. But Bill, do we know each other? You sound either you've called us before, or do I know you? I mean, being serious.
Yes. Oh, sure. I knew you when you were Dr. Sky at another station, in fact.
Okay. Then I just listened to your voice, and I'm thinking, hey, I know this guy from somewhere. But thank you for following us. I appreciate it. You have another question or comment before we go?
Yes, I want to also know, what do you know about the Thresher, the loss of oil on board? You remember that one?
So the Thresher was a critical milestone event in U.S. submarining. It was the first of a new class of submarines, what became the Permit class. It was originally called the Thresher class, and in 1963, it was they'd been in the shipyard for some modification work, and they were setting out to do the post-maintenance testing, where you take a submarine out and you test it by diving it deep and putting it through its paces to make sure all the repairs were completed satisfactorily. So they ended up having, because of that, there was a crew of 112 with 17 civilian engineers and technicians on board. They were carrying a crew from the shipyard out with them for part of the testing. And in the middle of this test, clearly something went wrong. We speculate about what it was. We don't know precisely, because the ship itself was destroyed. There was nothing left to bring back up except small pieces.
That's horrible.
Well, we have the photographs of this, and we have the recordings of the last few minutes of the testing, because they were in communication with a surface vessel that escorts them out to do this testing and to keep track of them where they are during the tests and assist them if necessary. And they talk on the underwater telephone. So there's a way we can sort of call up like you would use a radio, but it's actually going through the sound waves in the water. And
that's amazing. What a sad moment in history. Yeah, it's a sad moment.
Very sad, yes.
Bill, we got to move forward, but thank you for calling us, and I hope you'll be a regular here on the Dr. Sky
Thank you.
Experience.
Nice speaking with you both.
Always a pleasure. Now let's do this. Let's go to John in the beautiful state of Hawaii, where, John, if you're with us, it's 7:18 in the evening on Saturday evening. Am I correct in my time analysis?
You're right there, Dr. Sky.
How are you?
Aloha.
Yes.
I just first wanted to say this is John. I served on the Bates back in the 70s. And,
Incredible.
I know Brad from email and from our Facebook page, and I just wanted to comment that Brad, you're doing a terrific job with the Cold War boats, and keep up the great work.
Thanks, John. I do it for you guys. I do.
I know. And I thought it would be kind of a time to bring up one of the things we talk about in the Navy and on submarines, and that's a sea story. And a quick sea story was I was a young sonarman, just reported to the Bates back in 1975, and I was sent back to measure the BQC battery voltage in the escape trunk just forward of the maneuvering room, where Brad's well familiar. And
I know it well.
So, anyways, they sent me up into the mezzanine to measure the BQC battery voltage, and I think the sonarman set me up. You know, I'm a retired sonarman.
Oh, gosh.
Also, I was an acoustic intelligence specialist, so I rode lots of submarines during the Cold War. Had the pleasure to ride the Bates twice back in the 80s. May have crossed paths with Brad on board, but I spent most of my time in sonar. And,
this is amazing.
The last time I rode was 1985.
Wow.
I left the boat in August '85.
Well, see, Brad, there are all these members of the different submarines, and particularly the ones that you served on. This is an incredible story here. But just can you tell us, John, Bill, can you just tell us the exact story on this thing? This is interesting when you're talking here, John, from Hawaii. There's an area where Pearl Harbor, they have submarines there too. I've been there, but it was ancient history for me. It was a long, long time ago. Can people see submarines, at least at port? Obviously, where the USS Arizona lies, in state.
Yeah. We have a pretty big presence out here in the Pacific, especially in Pearl Harbor, and also forward deployed in Guam, San Diego. And I see them offshore right off of Waikiki from time to time and get a thrill out of that. I kind of miss it. But just going back to my quick sea story, they sent me back to measure the BQC battery voltage. And the BQC is an emergency underwater telephone that we would have to use in the event that we went down and we couldn't come back up. So for communications, as was mentioned during the Thresher incident. And when they had the emergency life raft was also there at the valve station right there below the mezzanine, inside the mezzanine. And when I lifted up the life raft to move it off of the BQC so I could unbutton it and measure the voltage, they had the lanyard hooked around one of the valves. And I pulled on the life raft, and the life raft started inflating in the mezzanine.
Oh, no. You don't want to do that.
Yeah. When we say life raft, we mean a 60-man life raft. The thing weighed about 150 pounds. And when it inflated, it filled up the compartment. You couldn't move. It was a huge thing.
Well, John, how did you get out of that predicament? Did you have a pin, or did you have some way to deflate it?
So I climbed down the ladder from the mezzanine, and I'm standing there looking up at this life raft inflating, kind of incredulous. And one of the nukes, one of the off-watch, shutdown watch guys in the maneuvering came out, and he looks up at it, and he kind of cursed a little bit, and then he took out his pocket knife, and he went up and stabbed it, and basically he deflated it.
Because that would give new meaning to an obstruction right in the hallway. What, in the Navy, they say make a hole? So in this case, you couldn't get through. There's no way to make a hole unless you deflate the damn thing.
Oh, man.
So I was not on good terms with the first lieutenant after that event.
I'm sure not, because those life rafts, as I recall, were $45,000 apiece.
Gentlemen, we got to move forward. I appreciate it, John. Blessings all the way out there to the beautiful state of Hawaii. We're at 7:23 in the evening. Wow, that's a big time difference for many people across the globe. But thank you for calling us.
Carrying us.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Let's move forward. We want to keep everybody at least in the opportunity here without calling it a queue. Let's say good morning to Dave from New York, if you're with us. Good morning.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah, how you doing, Steve?
Doing well, my friend. Thank you.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
I was in the service. I joined late 1968, and early 1969, I was stationed aboard the USS Orion, which was a subtender for the Atlantic.
Uh-oh. Dave, I think you just went into the stratosphere.
Hello.
I think we lost Dave. Dave, I guess you'll just simply have to call back. We lost you somehow through the power of electromagnetic waves here. But what I want to share with you, and we'll get Dave back, I'm sure. But this is interesting. I wanted to talk about Admiral Hyman Rickover before we go to the bottom hour here, the heartbreak. This man, a legend in his own time, liked and not liked by many, but describe him in the positive way, at least this way, and then your own way, that he was the father of the nuclear navy in the United States Navy, That's an interesting story. I guess you can do it in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, I hope. There you go.
Sure.
Okay.
Hyman Rickover was foreign born, graduated from the academy, served in the Navy during World War II on, and became, through his incredible drive and determination and and a very focused, singular purpose focused on an assignment, which was to produce submarines out of submersibles, ultimately became the father of the nuclear navy, as we referred to him. And sometimes we say that in jest, and sometimes we say it in reverence. But I had the opportunity to stand watch with him back in 1980 when I was a young whippersnapper at a nuclear training prototype in New York that he was visiting, and I had the pleasure of being relieved by him as he took over my watch station, and then got to relieve him a few minutes later. And so I sort of have a first-hand experience with him. I didn't work with him as such, but having seen him, and he was 80 years old probably, and too small for his suit, or vice versa. He wore a suit that was definitely too big for him. Didn't wear a naval uniform. That was a thing that he sort of...
Yeah, I noticed that in pictures. Right, no naval uniform. Yeah.
Ceremonially, he'd wear it at times, but he was more of a guy who was he worked more like a CEO or, a skilled politician at maneuvering
a businessman.
Bureaucracies.
Right, a businessman.
Yep, yeah, kind of a businessman. And, and he was 80 years old, and he came in and relieved me on watch, and... so I had a chance to speak with him, and he was astonishingly present. There was just something about him as he was right there. He knew what was going on. I gave him a turnover of all the things that had happened on the watch in the previous 24 hours, as we were required to do. And when I got the watch back from him 15 minutes later, he recited all those things back to me verbatim, which I was astonished by. And I mean, just his presence really impressed me. I sort of answered the question of why was Rickover the person he was. Well, in standing in front of him, I felt that. I felt the answer to that. And he turned the Navy from a disjointed approach on the different options of the future of submarines into a singular purpose where we had propulsion nuclear reactors built and people trained to operate them. And of course, the Navy remains today, the Navy nuclear power program remains today as having never had a nuclear accident on all the hundreds and hundreds of nuclear reactors they've operated.
Yeah, Brad, this is amazing, because as we go to the hard break here in just a moment, I just wanted to get one little comment in. I had many friends that were Naval Academy graduates, and some of them shared this story with me. I don't know how true this is. I mean, I believe them, but maybe you know more about it. If you wanted to interview to be in that command position, to be the commander of a nuclear submarine, he would put you in this room with a rickety chair. And unbeknownst to you, you walked in. I guess anybody who went in would say, hey, watch out for the rickety chair. But you would have to have this direct look in his eyes and maintain that, that look. And he would ask you these incredible questions. And somebody told me this, and I don't know if it's a joke or not, but I didn't think it was too funny. He said the admiral had a submarine on his desk, and he said, young man, how badly do you want to command one of my submarines? And the, candidate said, of course, sir, I want to be a commander. And he said, how bad? And then the guy says, well, I'd love to be one. And he said, okay, then smash that submarine that's on my desk. And the candidate looked in awe, like, what the heck are you talking about? And the minute you raised your hand, he would say, and I heard this quote, get the hell out of here and get out of my Navy. I don't know how true it is.
Well, he was.
I heard he was a tough guy.
In a sense, and
he could be.
I've talked to many people who have been, who had to interview with Rickover, and all of them kind of had the same, not the same story, but similar stories of questions that didn't seem to be related to what was going on, that Rickover would use to decide whether you were going to go further in the program or not.
That's amazing, Brad. We got to hit the hard break here. Sorry to cut you short. We have obviously Dave from New York. Hang on, Dave. Don't go away, because we'll get to you if you're still on the line, of course, when we come back from this important break. here on this conversation we're having with Brad Williamson, Executive Director, ColdWarBoats.org. You can go there. A great website to learn so much more than we even have time in 2 hours here on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, spending part of your weekend with us. The Dr. Sky Experience continues in force. In our second hour, still time to get in on the conversation, and we'll do our very best to get those that are waiting in the queue. Brad Williamson, if you're just joining us, he's joining us, the Executive Director of ColdWarBoats.org. He's testifying and telling us his stories of being undersea for at least a period of some 80-plus days with his crew members on the USS William H. Bates. Let's go to the callers. We owed the opportunity to have Dave get his question or comment in. Dave, good morning, and sorry we couldn't get you before the break.
Yeah, I don't know. You hyperspaced me, but I called back.
Okay, thanks.
I was when I joined the service, the Navy in 1968, late 1968, and in early 1969, I was stationed on the USS Orion, which was the subtender for the Atlantic Fleet, and I worked in the machine shop, and it's kind of strange that we had a duty roster maintenance schedule chart that still had the Scorpion and the Thresher on it when I was in. So it was shortly after they went down, And I don't know what my security clearance was, but I always thought it was kind of odd that I could actually walk up and see the duty board, which was way up in the top, where they had the location of every submarine in the Atlantic Fleet, and probably some of the ones that the Russians had out there too. But I'm sure everyone on my ship had a security clearance, But
sure.
Yeah, it was interesting.
It sure is, Dave. But you guys are very close in this. He was on the tender and you were on the submarine, both vitally important to keep each other going, right?
Yeah, I never got to go down in a submarine, but I was on several. When we were at the pier there, on one side, we were on one side, and anchored off of us were the nuclear subs to the side, because you had to go through us to get there. And the other side was the conventional subs, the Sea Leopard and a few of them. But I've been on them, but I never actually got to go down on them, which I was always kind of disappointed about that.
Well, Dave, thanks for your experiences. I want Brad to comment because we're trying to get the caller board moving along here. But, hey, thank you. Appreciate your time and hope you'll continue to join us on future episodes of the Dr. Sky.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, let's say good morning to Joe in New Jersey. You've been patiently waiting. Your comments to Brad.
Yes, Dr. Sky, thank you very much for taking my call. You're doing a great job for WABC.
Hey,
Brad,
thank you, my
Thank you
friend.
for your service, my man.
It was an honor to serve.
God bless you. I was stationed on the USS Saratoga, 81 to 85. I did 2 more years, but I was on the carrier for 81 to 85. I know, Brad, it wasn't as confined as you were, but we were confined. Believe me, Brad. We had on our deployment, we had 7,000 and a half guys. No girls were allowed on the ship at that time.
Right.
Because it was a combat ship. And I was on the deck. I was on a flight deck. I was on a bow catapults. And let me tell you, it wasn't no easy task. But in my berthing area, we had 300 guys in my berthing area. I slept right under the flight deck. That was just one berthing area. There was tons of them all over the ship. So that's how confined we were. It was insanely confined. It was crazy. But at least I breathed air, Brad. You had it a little tougher than me for not breathing air. At least I breathed some air. And also, one Cold War story real fast. I know, Dr. Sky, we got to get
No, that's all right. Go ahead. This is exciting.
When we were on deployment, when we were in a port, every port we went to, and it was a bad time. We couldn't wear our uniforms. We had to wear civilian clothes because we were under Reagan. Doc and Brad, you know what I'm talking about. And it was a bad time. We were marked. But every port we went to, there was a cruise ship that from the Soviet Union, the old hammer and sickle flag they had on it. They were following us around everywhere we went. That ship was assigned to our carrier. I was on the USS Saratoga, like I told you. Every port we went to, Naples, France, Toulon, France, everywhere we went, that cruise ship was right there. Everywhere we went. And there was nobody on it, just dark brown curtains and the hammer and sickle flag. But we always waved to it every time we got on the pier when we were getting liberty. We always waved to it, and it wasn't a friendly wave. We gave one of our fingers. I don't want to say which one, right? And we saluted them nice when we were walking by them. Believe me.
I'll bet.
There you go. What stories? Joe, that's amazing. I wanted to add something here. Both Brad, I never told him this, I guess. Well, I did mention before, we were invited to do a media, what they call half of a Tiger cruise. In other words, we left from San Diego, had to spend a day in training to fly on the cod, and we had our camera people there doing this for TV. So we're flying out about an hour and a half out to the ocean, did the carrier landing. My stomach, boy, I tell you, that's another story. But the point is, when we got to meet the captain, we were greeted like we were like the three wise men or whatever. And they gave us this great room and board, I thought. So they said, we're giving you the executive suite. And I was like, what the heck? We don't deserve that. So guess what the executive suite was, Joe? Like you're saying, people crammed in like sardines. They gave us this closet with 2 bunk beds right under the flight deck. And I had, because I do a lot of shooting and firearm training, I had earplugs and a headset, for sound. All night long, we couldn't sleep. So we got up and joined the pilots and had this amazing breakfast. And I don't know, it was the craziest thing. It was a fried egg on Texas toast with sauerkraut and peanut butter. And the guy told me, eat one of those and you'll sleep all night. And I did. So how about that, guys? Pretty wild, huh?
The stories we remember.
Joe, thank you for your service. God bless you. And we do appreciate it.
This guy. One more thing before I go. I'm going to hang up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Gotta get.
No, go ahead.
The chow halls, them guys, those cooks, they are the heroes. Because they fed 7,000 guys every day. Every day. 3 meals a day, plus mid-rats. So 4 meals a day, 7,000 guys they fed. They are the heroes. They are
Joe,
indeed.
Thanks for the call, my brother. Hope you'll stay in touch with us.
God bless you, Dr. Sky. God bless you, Brad.
Hey, thank you so much.
You too.
Before we go to the next break, let's say hello to Dennis in Indiana. Dennis, good morning. You're on the Dr. Sky Experience. What a good morning it is. Hopefully it is for you too. Oh, Dennis is gone. Well, give us a call back. But Brad, this is so amazing talking about, your stories and what you're doing. Briefly, you had a reunion, if I'm correct, in Las Vegas recently for the organization?
We did
Talk about
indeed,
that.
Yep. Had a little mini reunion in Las Vegas literally last week. And one of the things about the submarine community is that bonds are formed with friends that are different from just about anybody else you meet in life. These were guys that I served with back between 81 and 85. We're about 20 of us that got together. And what we had in common was we were all qualified in submarines, and we all served on the Bates at one time or another. And it's like most good friends, we picked up right where we left off the last time we were together and telling stories and reminiscing about the events and the challenges that we had and the problems that we solved and the times we were thinking we were going to die. And did all that for a few days in Las Vegas, and it just reminded me that like most soldiers in combat situations, when your life depends on somebody else, even if you're not friends with them at the time, it's something that sticks with you for life. And
absolutely,
and you can't walk away from it.
It's a brotherhood, very powerful one, just like law enforcement and all the other military, branches of the service. But how interesting, Armed Forces Day, as we talk about this very interesting subject. And again, blessings to all those that serve right now in active duty, obviously a very important part of our world. But, when we come back, I want to talk about something here. I've heard this, I've read this, I don't know how true, and nor do I know how much you can tell us. But apparently, in the event of nuclear war, the nuclear submarines that patrol the oceans is primarily our ace in the hole, as they say, one of the part of the triad. Allegedly, there's this big jet aircraft, we've talked to pilots on it, that flies called the Takamo jets that take charge and move out. They apparently drag a long wire if in the event that they have to communicate with the submarines, who also trail some sort of a wire, to execute, God forbid, if we had to, emergency war orders to launch nuclear missiles off of these submarines. I wanted you to, maybe you can't reveal all the secrets, obviously, but when we come back...
We can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I wanted just to hear a little more when we come back on this, because it's an interesting subject. God forbid there ever were a situation where nuclear war, evolved, whether it's hopefully never a first strike by us. But in the event that something like this did happen, there's a whole series of events. So in other words, simply, it's not easy for anybody to go rogue, go a little loony, and run into the missile launch control and just start turning levers. It doesn't happen that way. In Hollywood, it might, but not in the United States Navy. Hopefully not in anybody's Navy, right?
Right, exactly. And history has proved us accurate in that.
No, that's a very interesting story. I mean, I watch a lot, I read a lot, I talk to a lot of people. We interview so many people on our programs, in the past and now the present. But that's an interesting story that we talk about what happens during nuclear war. So again, Brad, obviously, coldwarboats.org. Is there any other way that you want people to get in touch with you? I mean, just go there. What will they be able to get? Is there a page for this contact page?
Right. There's my contact information is on every page of the site. There's a little box on the lower right-hand side that has my name, Brad Williamson, and a link to either contact me through email or to send me a private message. And you don't even have to be logged in to use those. So I'd encourage everyone that has served on submarines during the Cold War and served on submarines not during the Cold War, who supported the submarine community, whether it was on a tender or in the Deep Submergence Group or any of the other literally hundreds of commands and ships that made submarines possible at the tip of the spear. Their families, relatives, especially children who are interested in what their father did back in the day, visit the site. Don't be afraid to register. It's fairly easy. We do ask for some information which lets us verify that it's in fact you. This is not quite like Facebook. We have to be a little more rigorous here. But we do respect your privacy. Your information is never sold, shared, given, or revealed.
Well, that's important, Brad.
So
we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Dr. Sky Experience with Brad Williamson to the top of the hour, 1-800-848-9222. We still have an opportunity to have you ask your questions or provide us with your comment. We'll be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
47 minutes after the hour. Thank you, Chippy Checker. We love you dearly. Had an opportunity to meet him on the road here in Arizona a number of years ago. And boy, does he sing it out. And let's twist. It's amazing, folks. As we move on, let's talk now and just welcome Nick in Cincinnati to the conversation on the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning.
Hey, Nick.
Hi, Dr. Sky. Hi, Mr. Williamson. What an honor to be behind Chubby Checker. Anyway, I wanted to let you guys in on something that's happening down here in Cincinnati, specifically in a suburb called Westchester. They're building a memorial to a submarine. It was the USS Cincinnati, and it was a Cold War era submarine, Los Angeles class, I believe. But basically they've gotten, I guess I call it the conning tower, not knowing that much about submarines, and some of the superstructure that they're rebuilding on a frame right out by the Voice of America building, which was another rescued Cold War facility that is a museum now. But anyway, I wanted to give you a website if you take it so folks could take a look at it. It's called subcincy, CINCY.org. And they've got a couple of nice films out there and some artist conceptions of what it's going to look like when it's finished.
Excellent.
That's very nice. I appreciate that, Nick. Doing more furtherance to, memorialize all the people that serve in our country in the military. In this particular case, your description of, I believe, what, Brad? The sail, is that what he's referring to, of the submarine?
Right.
That's being built?
Yeah. They were called conning towers back in the World War II boats because the control center for the submarine was actually inside the thing that stuck up, the big thing in the middle. And so they call those conning towers on the World War II diesel boats. And now the ship's control station, which is called control, is now down inside the pressure hull, no longer up in the top. So we just refer to it as the sail, as opposed to a conning tower. It houses mostly the periscopes and antennas. In order for them to reach the surface when we're submerged, they have to be very long. And so the periscopes and antennas, when they're retracted, stretch all the way from the bottom of the ship, which is about 30 feet below the bottom of the sail, to the top of the sail. And then when you stick them up hydraulically, they can break the surface of the water so you can use the periscopes, et cetera.
Well, thank you, Nick, in Cincinnati. We appreciate you. And
yes,
like I say to everyone, hope you'll continue to join us on this particular adventure that we do each week, the Dr. Sky Experience. I wanted to we only have a limited amount of time here. We were talking about the Takamo planes. I was talking about wires, being trailed, submarines,
right.
Obviously picking up signals. And am I correct in this? It's extremely low frequency that these particular submarines would actually capture those signals. Am I correct in that?
Right. As a general physics rule, the longer the wavelength of the electromagnetic signal, the further it can transmit through dense absorptive medium like water. So much of our submarine communication throughout history has been done from shore stations that are transmitting very long frequency radio waves directly through the earth to antennas that trail behind submarines while they're submerged. There's variations on that, and the current technology I am not familiar with. I know it's improved a lot since the time I was on board. The stuff that we did with satellite communications back in the day was fascinating, but it's probably not even relevant anymore given how many changes have been made.
Well, it's amazing to talk with you about this, Brad, because what I'm saying is this is so amazing. A wire, which is such a primitive little thing that's trailed out there, is so vital for a communications link in modern times. But I'm hoping, and hopefully we'll do this again, Brad, because I know this is very popular just by the number of calls, obviously as an open door to you. But I do want to get into a discussion sometime of some of the big hard punch, capabilities of some of these nuclear submarines with the nuclear D5, type rockets that they have on there and the, alleged number of megatonnage that comes out of this. I mean, you could literally take out, one country with just one submarine if in a situation where it had to, God forbid. That's how powerful these submarines are and how vital to America's security, and we see other countries building them. So we'll have to do that in a future one. But let's say in the last few minutes, good morning to Al in New York City. We try, of course, to honor the callers. Good morning to Al.
Hey, Dr. Sky. How you doing?
Doing well, sir. Thanks.
I had an uncle. He served on the Razorback. That was one of the men he had in World War II. I think at the end of World War II, we had like 280 subs out of like 7,000 ships. We're down to 70 now. I'm hoping that we can build some more because we have such limited shipyards. And like you were just saying, one sub, I believe, at least they used to have on the Tridents, which is like 560 feet long, 240 different targets. I don't know if that's still true, but it shows that we're still quite powerful. I'm just hoping that the author there could tell us a little bit more. Can we maybe increase our shipbuilding to keep us safe? And
good point, Al. You probably have to take this answer offline as we go to the top, but go ahead, Brad. This is very interesting. What else talking about?
I would just say quickly, the number of targets that the weapons that we can have targeted is strictly controlled by our strategic arms limitations talk that we're under the SALT III agreement right now, I believe. And so the SALT limits are more restrictive than our ability to build more submarines, meaning if we want to build more missile submarines, we have to decommission some that are in business right now because we're limited by the number of warheads we can carry. And that's been done throughout the entire Cold War and since. We routinely replace
aging ballistic missile submarines with newer ones. But we always keep it pushed up against the limit of the strategic arms limitation talks. And you're also right on the point that our shipyard capability is very critically limited. We have essentially 2 shipyards right now that can build submarines. We're only building about 1 a year. The stuff I've been reading recently suggests we ought to be able to build 3 a year if we're going to stay competitive with the way the rest of the world is changing. Submarines are clearly going to be a part of our future mix. The day of the aircraft carrier, I can't say it's gone, but aircraft carriers are for carrying the flag and showing diplomacy. Submarines are for making bad guys go away.
No, you say it so well. No, you really do. And then one last quick comment here. I just wondered if you'd give one. The USS Connecticut obviously had some sort of an incident where she crashed into a seamount, I guess somewhere between Taiwan and China. That was a big hullabaloo, and I think the commanding officer got relieved of duty, to say to speak, to put it that way. But whatever happened there, you can't see, obviously, looking out a window, so that's nasty. It hit a seamount, an undersea mountain.
This is not the sea view. There is no glass in the front of it. It's we navigate by some elaborate systems, not the least of which is dead reckoning. We keep track of where we were and how long we've been going the way we were going, so we know where we are. We carry very, very accurate charts to keep track of what's on the bottom of the ocean underneath us, and we still run into things all the time. In fact, probably every submarine that's ever existed has had a collision at some time or other with something in the water or with the land under the water. I certainly had my share of them. And of course, it's only been about, 10 or 12 years ago, the San Francisco, which was a Los Angeles class submarine, ran into an uncharted undersea mountain, essentially at full speed, and one of the sailors on board was killed, and almost everybody else was injured. And a great testimony to the quality of shipbuilding that's involved and the training and skill of the operators of the submarine in that moment, that they were even able to save the ship. The ship was it still amazes me, having seen the photographs of the damage of the ship, that they were actually able to save the ship and themselves. And they did, and they got it back. But one young sailor lost his life in that. And that stuff is still out there. It's not, the ocean is not bounded by science. Things change. We see places in the seafloor where these, especially on the fault zones, where the seamounts will rise up out of nowhere, literally between, the time one chart is plotted all the way through and the next one comes out. Places in the bottom of the ocean can change by 1,000 feet, and there's examples of that. It's a dynamic planet, and we are not yet masters of it. There is only one enemy in the ocean, and that's the water itself, and everything else is incidental to a submariner. We must defeat the ocean first.
Brad, it's been an honor, and I think this has been a great journey, undersea or above the sea, or as we talk about the subject. I'd like to have you back, of course, and by popular demand, I'm sure that would be easy, to update us on new things, and we could get into maybe some homework for both of us to talk about the nature of the submarines that we do have. What is the force like? What are other countries like? Who, if anything, we need to be concerned about, whether it's China, North Korea, or what other countries, Russia, some of the submarines that they're building, and not just in a jingoistic mentality like wartime.
Right.
Maybe just to understand what's the technology. But I got to say thank you for now as we close this edition. Hopefully everybody was happy.
It's been great. I appreciate you having me on the show, and
always
appreciate the listeners. Come visit the site, see what we're about, and follow us.
Cold War Boats, right? coldwarboats.org. Thank you, Brad Williamson. We'll talk soon. And as we close, I wanted to remind everybody, we're like a ship here too, Brad. We're like a spaceship of our own, a starship with a powerful signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC. I want to thank our producer and the person who's taking the helmsman seat, and that is Bill, navigating this powerful starship, navigating the amazing signal of 77 WABC out to the cosmos, and I'm sure even beyond. Next week, folks, in the Friday edition, we're looking to have astronaut Story Musgrave, probably one of the most amazing astronauts I've ever come to know. probably the smartest man I've ever known. He has, I believe, 4 master's degrees and 2 or 3 PhDs, and so many other great guests that we'll be sharing with you about what animals do in the night as we open up our minds. And then, here, obviously we say it proudly, stay with us here on 77 WABC as we go deeper into your morning with Lionel on this great radio station. See you next week, and thank you. God bless, and health and happiness to all.